going to start off with American blended whiskey.
Okay.
We're going to transition to Merced 1917 rye. Then we're going to go to the prime barrel rye selection, single barrel pick. Then we're going to do some bourbon tasting. We'll start with sour mash bourbon. That's going to be number 4. Sample number 5 will be prime barrel hazmat bourbon pick. And then we'll finish off with sweet potato liqueur.
Okay.
So that is going to be the order. Would you agree with that order, David?
I'm good with that. Yeah, that's how I would do it.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. David, yes, I think it will be very, very helpful if you kind of talk people through who you are, what the how the distillery started. I think there's a nice, interesting story behind it, knowing I'm having to meet you, and then we can probably talk to people about some, how this whole communal project came about, because I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Souza, founder, distiller of Cash, 4th generation farmer. My family's been farming here in California since 1917. Sweet potatoes, almonds, rye, watermelons, many things over here, beef, cattle, dairy. But our staples since 1917 have been sweet potatoes, rye, and some other grains. We've, over the years, our farm started off at like 40 to 50 acres that my great-grandfather originally purchased when he moved here from Portugal. And then my grandfather, the 2nd generation, grew that to a couple hundred acres. And then my dad, the more ambitious of all of us, grew that for 200 to 2,000 acres. And the 2,000 acres we farm takes roughly about 250 employees to manage and harvest and plant and do all the things that we do, because the vegetable side of it requires a lot of painstaking labor, I should say. Growing up, my dad and I are too far apart in age, so my dad and my mom got married at 16, had me, and was taught to start working on the farm at about age 7. By the time I was 15, my grandfather came out of retirement and he farmed with me for a couple of years. Okay. And then after 2 years of farming together, they kind of were like, okay, you know what you're doing, you're ready to go. And I was off on my own. So ended up growing my own personal farm up to about 150 acres, and then decided that in my mid-20s I should be running the show. And my dad was in his 40s and was like, no, I don't think so. So I looked to diversify the family business and take crops that we were basically tossing sweet potatoes and rye away for very cheap costs, and so decided to try to make spirits out of them. And no formal training, bought a book off the internet, made a still, bought the parts and put a still together, and then eventually had my created our first few recipes.
Great.
Did I lose you guys? Okay, here I
am. Yeah. Still here.
Okay. I couldn't see anything. So, so developed our first recipes, which initially was sweet potato vodka and the 100% rye whiskey. We launched that. That was 2007. Once the recipes were developed, it took a couple of years to get the actual distillery built. So that happened and finished, licensed, approved in 2009. And finished roughly early 2010 is when we launched with our vodka, and also started laying down our rye whiskey. So creating the world's first sweet potato vodka, I also wanted to create the world's first sweet potato whiskey, not realizing that after 5 years that the government wouldn't let me call sweet potato alcohol whiskey because it didn't have grain in it, which kind of leads into our first tasting today, our blended rye whiskey, which actually contains 80% sweet potato, 20% rye, barrel aged, all new charred American oak, but minimum age of 5 years. And the sweet potato is distilled exactly to the specifications of our bourbon and rye, which is 135 to 140 proof off the still, and then barrel aged in new charred American oak at 120 proof for a minimum of 5 years. So, my big thing that, and my dad's too, is sustainability and trying to, use all of our resources, whether it's recycling, regenerative sustainability. So yeah, so I wanted to put the same mantra of sustainability into the distillery as we do on our farm. So all the grains, spent mash, sweet potatoes, all of that goes to our dairy down the street. We feed to the cows. All of our water is recycled and reused within the distillery. So we preheat all of the water coming off the still to use for cooking the next day. And so I would say 99% of everything we do is recycled within the distillery. There's always some waste, like the heads coming off the still. I do have a guy that burns them in his race car every so often when he needs them, but ultimately we don't have a full scale on that. But pretty much everything else is recycled and reused or repurposed out on the farm, whether it's for fertilizer, cattle feed, or so forth.
Man, this American blended whiskey is like a dessert in a glass. At least the nose, so sweet.
Yeah, I think so. The sweet potato adds a lot of those, like sometimes you get a little bit of fruit spice in there, and a little bit of that, butterscotch sweetness that tends to be lent from that sweet potato.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. This is wait a second. So this one, the first one, right? Rye blended whiskey. So this is rye, right? What's the mash? What's the mash bill on this?
Well, no, it's technically it's a blended whiskey, but it's 80% sweet potato. So what we do is
I see.
we barrel age sweet potato alcohol, 100% sweet potato alcohol. We barrel age it in its own barrel, and then our rye barrels, and then we do a barrel blend. And so it's an 80-20 blend, 80% sweet potato, 20% rye.
Got it.
So we will be releasing this year actual single barrel sweet potato, since they did change the rules and we're able to put age statements on it now. So we actually will be releasing some 10 and 11-year-old single barrel sweet potato alcohol, which, so you'll be able to taste it without the rye in it.
There's interesting comments. I'm moderating the comments so you don't have to look at it, but people are saying, Brandon said, the nose reminds them of a spa for some reason. I don't know, Brandon, if you want to elaborate on that, but I thought that was really funny.
I definitely agree that it's sweet on the nose, like you guys are saying. But I also get like a faint like nail polish remover, but like not in a bad way, and like also maybe some eucalyptus in there. I don't know.
The sweet potato alcohol is definitely more florally, and so it does tend to, like, even our vodka, we run the vodka itself through coconut carbon just to remove some of the aromatics, because it's so aromatic and it smells very perfumey. But you don't want your vodka to be overly perfumey, because it will show up in specific cocktails or may screw up a cocktail. So because the sweet potato alcohol is so very aromatic, we actually do a double filtration, but coconut carbon helps absorb some of those odors, which obviously we don't do that in whiskey. The only filtration it gets is the barrel. So, but yeah, you're not wrong on those notes, on those aromatic notes.
Matt said this is sweet and spiced at the same time. Gotta say it's weird, but weird in a real good way.
Yeah,
I would say unique. Yeah, for sure. And I can tell you, like when we were there at your place during the barrel pick, I think this was one of the things that everybody tried and got that got everyone talking. At the time. Like it was just so unique. Like people don't necessarily drink this all the time.
Yeah, and I think when you taste the single barrels that are coming out, you'll find that it's definitely more reminiscent of like a real rich like Armagnac or maybe a cognac rather than a whiskey. So I feel like it can be richer and spicier than say an Armagnac or a cognac, but that's probably because of our California climate, just like we get these exceptional heats here. So we're pulling a lot of those oak notes, rich, deep oak notes out of the barrel, but it definitely drinks more fruit spice than like a grain rye spice when you taste it like by itself.
A few people commented that this gives them Fruit Loops note on the nose.
You'll sometimes see that, and that's something like, and I think we did this when you were here, Michael, but like doing barrel picks, we talked about terroir and how that changes the whiskey profile, especially with our Merced rye. It tends to lead a little bit sweeter, less minty than some of the ryes out there. And a lot of that has to do with, 90% of the rye that we farm is a rotational crop with our sweet potatoes. And so when you taste barrels in the distillery, we can find, if we look at our farming notes and where the grains were harvested, if we had an almond orchard and we pull that out after 30 years in almonds or 20 years in almonds and plant rye, and then we have a rye field that's in sweet potatoes and we plant the Merced rye on the sweet potato ground, those two ryes actually will taste different in the barrel after you've aged them for a while. They don't really taste too different on the still as much, but you definitely notice it after it's aged, and you get a lot more complexity out of the sweet potato fields versus the straight almond fields. So it's pretty interesting to see those dynamics happen, which ultimately, if we didn't grow our own stuff, we wouldn't know this. So,
David, could I ask, how often do you rotate the crops in the field? How long does the almond versus the rye, etc.?
So an almond field is planted typically a minimum of 15 years. If it's a good producer, it can last 20 years. We like to try to get 20 years out of them. The old days, it used to be 30 years. But we've narrowed that down and densely planted them so we can get more trees per acre, and the trees are smaller, which make them to harvest. But sweet potato ground gets rotated every year. So the sweet potato, like it goes sweet potato, rye, sweet potato, or it'll go sweet potato, rye, lay fallow for a whole year, and then sweet potato again. The only time we farm sweet potatoes back to back is if we're renting a field. So like, say if one of our neighbors calls us up and says, hey, I'm going to pull out my orchard and I'd like to give it a break. I'd like you to farm sweet potatoes in it for a little bit. That's typically a time, since we're renting and we have a short-term rental contract, we'll farm sweet potatoes. We'll farm rye the first year and farm sweet potatoes 3 years in a row. But remember, all sweet potato ground gets put in rye every year. So it's an actual rotation. The only difference is if we're not going to farm the field in sweet potatoes, that's when we harvest the rye.
All right. How do we feel about moving on to the second one, which is a 1917 rye?
So the 1917 is basically, it's a minimum of, so 1917 is the year we started farming. It just so happened that the whole reason we moved into the cash strain at this age was it's kind of the sweet spot. So 1917 days, which is like 5.25 years. It's really like, feels like a sweet spot at the time. Now that we have 10-year-old whiskeys, it's different. But at the time, there was this sweet spot and consistency that we found within the flavor profile, the richness of this 5.25 year whiskey. And it seems to be very consistent with our weather patterns, that at this age, it's always roughly 123 proof. So a lot of, back when we first were getting more of this age of whiskey and we were a younger distillery, we were doing a lot of farm tours. And when you get a farm tour, people would get to go to the barrel room and taste through barrels. And ultimately, we had a lot of people that, especially women at that time, that were like saying, hey man, like, can we just buy this? And I'm like, you mean just like out of the barrel? They're like, yeah, like this is delicious. Like this is what we would want to, it's approachable even at 123, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of how this came to be. But essentially, this is our standard, what we would pull right out of the barrel of 5 years. We don't, there's no filtration, no dilution. It's just, we filter the charcoal dust out of it, but no chill filtration or anything of that sort. So this is probably one of our, besides our single barrels, probably one of our number one sellers.
People are agreeing with it too. Ken said it's toasted marshmallows on the palate, and then Paul said Big fan of 1917 Merced rye. This one is a real tasty rye. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's the proof with the palate. It's like, yeah, you get these toasted marshmallow, but like kind of a little bit of like, you get the spice in it, but a little bit of rich chocolate on the finish. But still has a little more floral note to it. And a lot of these barrels with the 1917 are coming off of that sweet potato ground. So you'll get a little bit more aromatic on it at the young age, where when you start looking into the 10-year-old and 9-year-old, 8-year-old single barrels, the aromatics, the floral notes kind of go away, and you get more just rich oak, caramel toffee notes.
Here's more notes for you. Chris says it's a perfect spice and dry chocolate. Brandon chimes in with honey dipped s'mores. And Matt said the same thing, actually. Spice s'mores.
Yeah.
Powerful finish, spice and chocolate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when we were there for the barrel pick, I think we actually started with this, right? As a primer before we dived into the barrels. I can't recall, but I remember we were drinking something as a primer.
Yeah, I think we did. I think this was it.
Yeah.
This is usually what I kind of try to gauge, even when I'm picking single barrels. Like, this is kind of our flagship rye. I mean, we have a 90 proof version that we started with to make it more approachable for people. But honestly, since we came out with 1917, we just sell a lot less 90 proof. I think it's for the people getting into Corbin Cash at the grocery store, and the Total Wines, where they can have more of a, a $45, $50 bottle to get introduced to us. But ultimately, I feel like when you dilute the 1917 down to the 90 proof, you actually get more of those florally, it's just more floral notes, and it adds a touch of more sweetness to it, which I'm not, I'm a fan of spice. So as the night, I loved our 90 proof, but as I drink more and more older cash strengths, it's a great starter point, but it definitely doesn't have the flavor components of 1917 for sure. But it's definitely, it's a starter whiskey. That's the way I look at it. It's great for what it is, but if you want to, this has a great complexity, but yet still approachable in its, in its proof. This is what I make my old fashions with it.
You already have a customer. Jason says he'll be buying a bottle of it. So that's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. And Chris says it's nice that a distiller wants to release a higher proof standard release. I totally agree, because normally people are already going to cite a caution, and by that I mean they're releasing something in that 80, 90 proof range to make it more quote unquote approachable. But this doesn't have to be, I guess.
Well, and honestly, man, knowing what I know now, starting off, you as an untrained distiller and not really, and understanding the market, but when you get into it and you see all the big sellers are 80, 90 proofs, and honestly, if I wouldn't release anything under 100 proof today. I have my blended and we have our 90 proof rye, but we don't have a bourbon under 100. Our sour mash is our lowest proof bourbon, 106 proof. And as I've wanted to just think, okay, maybe we need to have something less, I'm like, no, I taste it and I'm like, the flavor profile just isn't the same. I don't really want to be under 100 proof anymore.
Let them add ice to it, and they can water it down as they want to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's there's plenty of 80 proof whiskeys, and it's funny when I remember when Maker's Mark talked about lowering theirs down a little bit, and the flack they got was insane. It's because I think once you're a fan, it's you don't want to go back down.
Sure.
You only want to go up, and I feel it's there's enough people that are into whiskey now that let the other people catch up and get to that point of where they're ready to start getting to the 100 proof and higher, because there's just plenty of diluted down whiskey out there.
And exactly. And truth be told, there's like you said, plenty of other brands start with that 80 to 90 proof point. So playing in that space is very crowded versus you kind of catering to not necessarily whiskey geeks, but for people that, to your point, do understand a bit of whiskey and how, and how the flavor is preserved with the high proof and all of that. And Chris Jones just said you made him a long-term customer with that comment, with that approach. So
yeah, appreciate that. Well, and it's funny, like it really, it was when I really got into as our whiskey started to get older and more complex, and we start rolling into these tasting notes, and it was really the hard fact of me releasing 1917 was more that the women who came out with their husbands and were tasting whiskey were just so adamant about, can I buy a bottle of this? This is, I don't drink high proof whiskey, but I really love this. And you're telling me this is 123 proof out of the barrel. And so that's when I'm like, because, us guys into whiskey is like, oh, we always want the high proof. But when women were saying, like, this is smooth enough to drink like it is, I really love this. And then, and obviously the husbands are agreeing. I'm like, okay, maybe I really need to think about this. And so the more we sat down and just drank it, it was like, okay, yeah, this is like, I don't even want to make 90 proof anymore, but we have to, because we already have, we already have people that have it. But definitely, I don't think we will be making anything under 100 proof anymore. It just doesn't appeal, right?
Yeah, and speaking about the proof, this next one kind of ratchets up things even further, right? So this one clocks in at what, 143 proof if memory serves? 143, 144, something like that?
Yeah, we are. Oh, my
200.
glasses.
I'm sorry. No. 134. This is
134.
Yeah. 134. Still, 134. I mean, I've had 134 proof whiskeys before that drank a lot hotter than 134.
Yeah.
And this one is just an opposite. But before, as you guys are nosing and tasting, I'll tell you a little story, and I got to give David his props. A lot of times when we start, setting up these calls to you guys, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and lots of prep work and whatnot. And not everybody kind of sees the things the way that at least we see them, which is to say, like, we always try to push the envelope. We try to do something different, not just to be different, but to kind of further this hobby of ours and make it fun, right? And as David and I were talking about this, and we were kind of discussing what the barrel pick should be, he said, well, our location is sort of like, in the middle of nowhere. Are you sure you're going to get people out here? And I'm like, well, that's a good question. Let me poll. And I really didn't expect a lot of people to join. But when I sent out a survey, a lot of people responded and said yes. Some of them were local, so it was an easier drive for them. But some people actually made a trek. And I kind of felt bad saying no to people. So I went back to David and I said, look, I have about 20 people that want to join. Can we make it happen? A, do you have space for it? And then B, how do you think we should actually handle it? He's like, well, I have a space. If you think you can comfortably do a pick with 20 people, have at it. And so we thought about it for a second, and then we thought this would be interesting because I haven't been a part of any barrel pick that was more than 10 people. And even that, I think, was a lot. I think the most that we had ever was 8 or something like that. Yeah. So,
well, they get challenging at 10. They get challenging when you're too many opinions. But I think the way you did it was ultimately pretty awesome, man. I was a little nervous, but it went great. So
so
kudos to that.
Thank you. So I'll explain to people how we did it. First of all, it was a surprise for people that were on it. Like, we didn't tell people that there's going to be 20 people participating in a pick. We just extended an invite. And so they, as people are shuffling into the distillery, like, you see this confused look on their faces. They're like, what the hell's going on? I thought I was here for a barrel pick. And then there's a crowd. So what we've done, essentially, we separated 20 people into stations. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 stations. I don't remember, 4 or 5 people per station. And each station had to select their own favorite barrel. And then they had to present their case to, like, the overall panel, so to speak. And we thought there's really going to be back and forth. And there was a little bit some of that, but I think it was a lot more unanimous than you would think there would be for 20 people, which kind of speaks to the whiskey itself. Yeah. So that's why the pick is called Communal Barrel, because it really took a community of people, 20 people, to select it. And when 20 people agree on a barrel, like, it's going to be at least decent, right? So what do you guys think about this?
It was pretty insane how many people picked this barrel. It was in everybody's top 2.
Yeah.
it was either their first or their top two,
Yeah.
which is why I think Michael, you were it was in there, but you were leaning towards the bourbon, and
I was an outlier. Yeah. That's another
yeah,
thing,
you were.
actually.
There was like two people that were outliers that wanted the bourbon, which we ended up doing anyway. But yeah, it was funny. It was really cool to see like everybody on the same page. We didn't really have to do a negotiation other than, are we going to do another barrel?
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, that's another thing that I completely forgot to mention. So the part of that fun was that we combined samples, so people didn't really know what they were drinking. It was all blind, but we had a good mixture of ryes, and we included the bourbon as well, right? I think there's a couple of bourbons actually, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So like you really were selecting a spirit just based on what you on the taste, right? And like I gravitated more towards the bourbon, which became a pick as well, but not without some, talking through it with others and stuff. Lots of people wanted this rye, and so we made it happen.
Well, and I think a lot of we've been getting a lot of people always question, like, especially with the hazmats, like some of the hazmats we've been getting up into the 150 range, and a lot of people are like, man, how are these drinkable at such high proof? And so a little bit of that, especially as they get older, we take a very 6 years into my aging whiskey, everything I've done has been a lot of just trial and error, because like I said, I'm not formally trained. It's kind of self-taught. And then of course our climate is so different than anywhere in Kentucky, or I'd say the closest area to aging whiskey to Central Valley is going to be somewhere in Texas. And thankfully, we don't have as high a humidity, so they're even probably worse to age whiskey there than we are. But we don't have quite the humidity they have, but we definitely have the heat. And so one of the things that I figured out 6 years into this was I had 6, 7 years, I had a few barrels that kind of over oaked on me. And, the average Joe probably wouldn't have tasted it, but I definitely noticed like a little bit of bitiness. And so I was like, man, what's going on here, and how do we mitigate it? And so I took the barrels apart, and I realized that on some of these, these barrels we were getting from back east or Midwest, we were seeing a lot of leaks in the barrels. The whiskey coming out, sucking in. Our rick house can get up to 135 degrees in the summer, and so we have this intense draw out. And you literally can see the whiskey coming out of the barrels. But what's happened, as it gets to 6 and 7 years old, and I took the barrel apart, we cut the staves, you can see where the whiskey is surpassing the char, going back into that raw wood, and those tannins are getting sucked back in the wood, which is now making that whiskey just a tad little bitey, knowing that the charcoal by 6 years is pretty much spent as a filtration device. So that's when I figured, okay, we got to do something different if we're going to be aging past 7 years. And so that's when we started looking at how to put together a better barrel built for California. And so I literally started working with winery cooperages, because they use a denser oak than whiskey cooperages. And so a lot of our barrels now, they're a little bit denser wood, but we slap a number 5 char. So we can get ripped into that dense wood, but keep it from actually coming out of the barrels. Where if I just buy a standard barrel from ISC out of Kentucky, they leak bad. We don't get me wrong, we get good flavor profiles, but we have to be very careful of over oaking or over tannining the whiskey with those barrels. Where with the ones we are currently doing today, we use a little denser oak, and we're getting some great, amazing flavors out of them. So,
are the staves thicker? I mean, I know some of the Texas whiskeys, Texas distilleries use thicker staves. Is that what you mean by dense?
No, I mean like the quality of the stave itself isn't thicker. It's just So the quality of the grain in the wood. So when you buy a oak stave, you can buy different grain, like the grain of the wood. So just like when you buy furniture, right? You got super fine grain, or you can have a widely, like a more open grain in the wood. So when you look at wineries, they don't want to get a lot of oak flavor. So they use super fine, dense oak. The other thing we do is we season our staves for 3 years, a minimum of 3 years. So 36 months, you let the oak just lay out there and get all the sap out of it. Let it dry out as best you can. And then, so the grade of the wood is just a little bit denser. And when you typically, if you want to make whiskey, you want a more open oak so you can get more flavor profiles in your whiskey, especially if you're only going to be 4 or 5 years old. And when you think about aging in Kentucky or Canada or anywhere else, they'll get 3, 4, 5, 6 months of snow. Like there's nothing going on in the winter. The whiskey's just kind of chilling out in the barrel. Here it's 12 months of interaction. Our cold, we'll get a 30-degree day, but we might get, or a 30-degree night, but we'll still get a 60-degree day in the winter. So we're getting accumulation of flavor almost 12 months out of the year. And that wasn't something that I was, didn't really know without actually getting in there. And then so after we started to hit that 6-7 year mark, and we're having these 115 degree days in the summer, 110, and then our rick houses are just metal sheds, so they're not insulated. Now I have an insulated room that we put some barrels in, and then we also take, the way we age our sweet potatoes is in humidified buildings with 4-inch freezer board insulation. So now we even take some of our older barrels, and when I know I'm like, hey, I want to do a 12-year, which we're going to be releasing this year, we go stick that in there, because if I left 12-year whiskey in our regular rick house, there'd be nothing left. We actually emptied some 10-year-old barrels that I didn't want to move. We just emptied 2 that were 160 proof, and there was only 12 gallons in the barrel. So not much in there. So great flavor profile, but that's where the little bit of temperature control can definitely help with those losses in the angel share.
David, as you were talking, I was reading and just monitoring the chat, and it's safe to say people this pick is agreeing with a lot of people, and I agree with a lot of comments too. Like one of the things that drew us to this barrel was that first of all, it drinks under proof. As I said, I drank other 130 odd proof whiskey that drinks a lot hotter than this, but yet at the same time, it has very full mouthfeel, right, without being overpowering. And that kind of primes your tasting experience. And then what got me personally hooked on it, it sort of builds from me like a crescendo. And the more it doesn't have the Kentucky hug, situation going on, but it does have. And I don't recall who said that, but there is a term, resolve. I think Nick Taylor called it a resolve. Essentially, what that means is, as the whiskey is going down, it creates another layer that kind of comes up, and you taste another tasting note. And for this one, for me, and I think Matt said it as well, it's like a salted chocolate. The more it kind of like the more it absorbs, my system absorbs this whiskey, the more I taste it. So that's great. Like it's the distillate that keeps on giving. So
and I think that attests a little bit to our Merced rye. It just has its own different profile, but also growing in the ground, the sweet potatoes is where you start picking up all these little sweet, chocolatey other notes that you don't get with a lot of other ryes. It's pretty rare for us to find that minty note, which a lot of ryes out there have. We don't tend to ever have that note. Every once in a while, we do get a barrel that'll have that a little bit spearmint forward. But for the most part, we don't typically get that. We get more, these other sweeter, fruitier, kind of different notes on our rye, just because of the type of soil we farm in, which kind of goes back to that testament of terroir with wine. it actually, because I tell people, if you'd asked me a few years ago if terroir made a difference with whiskey, I'd have told you probably not. I don't think so. But I absolutely have one bottle or one batch of whiskey that, you know, people were like, oh man, what happened? Is this messed up? Like, it was actually grown in a completely different soil type than we normally farm in. And it was a rented field. And most of our soil out here is super sandy. You know, it's like blow sand, very little standing. We just had 2.5 inches of rain and no standing water. Like it just goes down and percolates. But we had one rented field that was a little bit more a loamy clay with sand. So it was a little bit stickier. And so that year, the rye in that field looked just lush and beautiful. And we had our typical rainfall out here is about 12 inches a year. That year we had 19.5 inches, just heavier soil. The rye, our rye, like Midwestern rye, typically gets about 4 feet tall. Our rye gets 6.5 feet tall. The rye was almost 7 feet tall, and the starch level was actually predominantly higher than it normally is. So I picked that field, and I just made all the whiskey that year from that field. And coming off the still as White Dog, it didn't taste any different. But 6 years later, I was like, what the heck is this? Like, this tastes like it was super grassy, very malty. It tasted like a really young, unaged Scotch. Not like in a peaty way, just in a more vegetal grass note, like really aromatic and sweet, without like Scotch without a lot of age on it. And it's funny, like when we still have a few cases left, and we see a lot of Scotch drinkers buy this rye, but it's completely different than anything we've ever made before. Kind of a fluke. Not my favorite. Just if I had to lay my hat on it, I would be like, I'd never make whiskey again. But it, wasn't anything that we did. It just literally was the soil type that made it different.
David, I want to make sure I get to this question. Tom asked if you could speak to the advantages and disadvantages of using a non-commodity grain in our commodity-driven farm system.
Yeah, so as far as the advantages, there's really three main advantages on the farming side. We've never grown the grain. My great grandfather planted it back in 1917. Obviously, we're in a very arid climate, so it was mostly for dust control and weed control. And so, obviously, planting this, it helped keep the dust from blowing. But the root system on Merced rye is so intense that it actually, we thought it always shaded the weeds out, but the root system is so intense, like it just chokes weeds out, so they can't grow within the Merced rye. But the root system actually goes down 13.5 feet and that's why it's so drought tolerant. It can survive with as little as 8 inches of rain per year. And in the 108 years we've been farming it, we've probably had to irrigate it like 3 times. And that's mostly because it got an initial rain to start and sprout it, but then it wasn't going to get any rain for like 2 months. And if it doesn't get it when it's like this tall out of the ground, it will die. So we'll have to go out and put sprinklers. But this grain is super drought tolerant. And that is, and for us, think about the old days before our drip irrigation, everything was flood irrigated. So sweet potatoes use a ton of nitrogen and potash fertilizer. And because we would flood irrigate, a lot of that fertilizer would get pushed down past our sweet potato roots, which only go down about 27 inches. And so with that, you're just pouring fertilizer down. Well, the Merced rye, being able to mine 13.5 feet, brings all of those nutrients back up to the surface. And then again, like I said earlier, we disc that in for green manure, and that green fertilizer is lush with nitrogen and potash, gets worked back in the soil. So that is the advantage of it from a non-commodity. The other advantage from a whiskey component is that my rye whiskey typically against other rye whiskeys doesn't taste the same. That could be a good thing or a bad thing to people. depending on if you like it or not. But ultimately, we have a very unique, typically flavor profile with most of our barrels. From those are probably the advantages. The disadvantages, there's nothing profitability. There's nothing to do with it. So there is no financial other than making whiskey now with it. For us, for 90 years, we didn't do nothing but harvest the seed to plant it the next year, because it has no viability in grain production for like bread or anything, even feedstock. It's like I said, it's very low in starch. So for making breads and things like that, there's no real advantage to it. And other grains produce much more product per acre. So they're really, from a financial standpoint, there is no advantage. For me, it was trying to find the advantage point was seeing if I could make whiskey and get some of my money back for farming this thing. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. I think that concludes the rye portion of the program. Let's switch over to bourbon side.
So this is this sour mash is made from our white corn. So a white sweet corn we grow that is it's a 70% white corn, 25% Merced rye, 5% malted barley. And so when I set out to make a bourbon, I really was never going to make bourbon, just because bourbon was so saturated, and we're from, bourbon's really known to be from Kentucky, but a lot of people kind of razz me and like, oh, you're going to be in the whiskey business and not make bourbon. Well, and I wasn't, growing up here in the Valley, we never had access to really great bourbon. Well, any great whiskey at all, to be honest. It's like Jack and Coke, and we drank Jim Beam White Label, like all of the standards. That's what we grew up on. So I was never a big connoisseur of whiskey growing up. So we actually take our distillery, which is kind of funny. Most distilleries aren't really set up to do it, but because our distillery is the way it's set up and it's, it's not real massive, it's easy for us to make a sour mash and take back set from the old batch out of the still while it's still boiling hot, and pump that into our cook, and then drop our new grains into that, and and use that initial 150 gallons of back set to be the starter for our sour mash bourbon. And I just wanted to kind of make something a little more traditional and less sweet, especially since we're already using a sweet corn. So that was kind of the idea, was like, man, I don't want my whiskey to be too super sweet. So we wanted to dumb that down. And then obviously add a little more rye spice with the 25% rye.
Dave, when you're not drinking your own whiskey, what do you reach for typically? Because I see all these bottles behind you.
I would, it depends. So like, I think I've got a few like favorites. I mean, if I'm out and about and I got to pick a whiskey, like it's a lot of the stuff is not the big popular brands. But if I had to pick a popular brand, I would say of rye, it's like I'd probably go to like the original Whistle Pig 10-year is my rye pick, or even an Angel's Envy, finished in a bourbon cask. But some of these crazy ones that I really like there's this Old Crow I have that I got to pick from. It's this OCD number 5. So I'm a big mezcal drinker, and I love smoke. And I hated Scotch in the beginning, because the only thing I ever had of Scotch was Lafroig, and I thought, how do people drink this? Now I can appreciate Lafroig. I still wouldn't drink it every day, but this here is so kind of cool. Like, somebody gave this to me. They're like, I don't like smoky whiskey, but I know you love mezcal. And dude, I like, a lot of times when I'm sipping on one of these interviews or whatever, I'm like sipping on this. It's got this really like good flavor profile, but a little smoke, and I've had friends of mine, they're like, oh dude, how can you drink that? But I love it. So it's just one of those things. But
I think your
another one of my favorites is
I was going to say, I think your Crow just went up a couple of notches here, because this is definitely brand, if you know type of category brand. And I got introduced to it by a fellow member. I kind of fell in love. We did a few barrel picks with them as well, including that one, OCD number 5. They're fantastic. But yes, I mean, some of them do definitely have that smoky note. It's different. Like, there is a difference between smoke and peat. I think a lot of times people transposed it to, and it couldn't be more different, right? So
yeah. And I'm not a big. I can enjoy some peat, but it's still not my go-to for a Scotch.
Yeah.
I'm really getting into American single malts. There's a brand that I've been like introduced to over the last couple of years out of Delaware, out of Baltimore, called Old Line,
Yep.
and have this Navy strength single malt that I sip on that too. So it's like I'm finding all these other, interesting distilleries that I feel like kind of follow our same ethos, and I really love that. And but like I said, I do enjoy some of the big brands. Even Jack Daniel's, some of their rye single barrels are great. I don't like number 7. To me, it's the worst whiskey, one of the worst whiskeys. But a lot of other stuff they do is just so damn good. So
I mean, Jack Daniel's single barrels are a completely different animal. Jack
No, they
Daniel's
are.
Cast strength is completely different animal from their
Yeah.
standard expressions. But there is a life hack to enjoy number 7. The trick is you have to drink it on the plane with Coke. It always tastes better up in the sky for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Have you? Big Matt is asking. Have you ever tried Found North? Anything from them?
Yes, I have had Found North, and I've actually just had a couple of Zoom meetings with them, and good stuff. I haven't had a lot of their stuff. I just we have a mutual acquaintance that tasted me on some of their things, and it was really good. There's, in a world of a lot of craft distilleries that I want to say are releasing too young of material, too young of stuff. I feel like there's a lot of good potential whiskey out there that people just aren't being patient enough with. But I feel like, and then there's just some that I don't think they thought about, like, what do other people think about this? Like, of course I want to like my whiskey, but when I set out to do this, ultimately I was like, I got to find something that other people like. Because at the end of the day, you're selling it. I'm not my palate isn't the end all be all. You hope people love it, but at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't matter if you like it if nobody else likes it.
Exactly. One thing they say about barrel picking, you better like what you select because you might be the one drinking it all. So,
yeah, exactly.
But anyway, back to this bourbon.
Which is why it's cool.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say, going back to that, the way you did the pick was great to see how the community pick, how they came together. But
and this is really an extrapolated version of what we normally do. And normally we include our members, at least 7, if we can get 7 at the same time. And normally we can. And the whole trick is behind it, not a trick, but like the whole idea behind it is that the more palettes you involve, especially if they're competing palettes, the better the pick is going to be, because ultimately you'll have to agree on something, right? Or sometimes not agree at all. And we have done that too, where we basically passed on a selection because we couldn't come to an agreement, or we didn't really all enjoyed it, right? So that's what makes it, I think, better for everybody. But what I was going to say about this bourbon, I was following the thread here and some notes. It looks like people do like it. I think they like it. If I'm not mistaken, they do like the rye a bit better, but bourbon is still definitely up there.
Well, and I think our sour mash is it's like I said, it's not built for everybody. I think it definitely, compared to like the bourbon that you guys picked, which is not a sour mash, right? It's a sweet mash, yellow corn, what people are used to probably drinking. This one here has a little bit of, it's got that little bit of funk in it, which, is, to me, I tend to drink. So, and remember, this is a blend of 4 and 6. We're getting more now. It's like everything's going to be probably 6 after this next bottling will all be 6, and I don't even know if we'll do any more 4-year. But as this, but with our sweet mash bourbon, which you're going to get into, like our first sweet mash bourbon release was 8 years old, and it's like I'm curious to see how the sour mash looks at 8 years old, a little more complex. This has a little bit more of that. It doesn't have as much complexity, But this one was also, these were also age different. So when you compare the next one to this one, think about, I tried to do this in a kind of a truer Kentucky style. So these barrels were not put away at 120 proof. We put them away at 110, and then we had a little bit of temperature control. So they never really experienced the true heat of our California climate, where with this next bourbon, you're going to look at a barrel that was put away at 125 proof and then sat in a rickhouse at 135 degrees through the summer, you know, and it experienced all of what our ryes have experienced. And I think that's why these single barrel bourbons have been such a hit, because this is just more of a subdued version. So we do have some sour mash that we're sitting out and putting it into normal and untemperature controlled, which I think is where my whiskeys really get their complexity and their flavor profiles, by hitting those really hot temperatures. So that gives you a little bit of understanding between the next bourbon that we try and the one you're currently drinking.
Yeah, so I mean, let's actually go to that next one, which is our pick, and this is 8 years versus what you were just saying. Your typical bourbon whiskey is 4 to 6, a blend of 4 to 6 years old, and this one is hazmat. This is 142 proof.
Yeah,
which I gravitated towards more so during the blind tasting without knowing the proof or anything else about it, really.
yeah. So this is a 75% yellow corn. So it's a yellow Indian corn that we have. It's only 15% rye and 10% malted barley.
Yes, and one thing I'll say, I did see a note. I'm not sure who said it, but they said your typical bourbon whiskey is very sweet, very pleasant, not super complex. I think you'll agree with this. I think the barrel pick is complex. Again, I'm biased, but you guys tell me.
No, I think it's very these hazmat bourbons are very complex. I think you can owe that to a little bit of the different variety of corn that we use, with obviously a little bit of the Merced rye. But again, I owed a lot of that to our barrels, and these are the wine grade barrels that I spoke about. The wood is a denser wood. It's a number 5 char. And these are hand selected, like oak wood for us, that would normally be, made for wine barrels. But we decided to, hit them with a heavy number 5 char and then use them. And then also aging it up at 125, going starter to 125 proof, definitely helped us hit that hazmat.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say people are digging it, and for the people that are asking if they can get more of this, unfortunately not. I knew this was going to be a quick hit, quick seller. Majority of the limited yield that we had was
and
gone.
You haven't released it yet.
I have, and we sold out.
Right, or you have?
We launched both at the same time.
So
yeah.
Oh, okay. I have one for my personal collection.
David, can you hold up that bottle real quick?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about something else. So you guys see that white little neck strip that's hanging out from the neck?
Oh, yes.
So this is another way where this bottle is, everything about this bottle is different, honestly. Like starting with how many people selected it, and then all the way to the actual label, because this is a one-off label, will never be repeated again. This was meant to commemorate this communal selection. But then this neck strip is also very functional. It's not there just for aesthetic reasons. If you notice, it says tap mate on the bottom. I sort of like alluded to this in our Discord conversations, but we are starting to experiment with this tech, and not even experiment, like we're full on board now. Every single selection that we make will have either a neck strip like this one or a sort of like a sticker that will be functional, not just for aesthetics. There, you can put it down. It's fine. So
I was going to show them.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, do that.
So if you come up here like this and you scan your phone, let me see if I can
watch it now.
It clicks
there we go. Yeah.
So then I click on that. Oh, hold on. I got to look at my phone.
Yeah. What it does, it brings up a web page.
Yeah, so it's going to bring up a web page. It's authenticating the tag.
Yes. So first of all, this tech has anti-tampering tech. Now, I am not Buffalo Trace, so I'm not really worried about people counterfeiting our selections.
Yeah.
But you get to see when the bottle was actually opened, and when you crack open that bottle, that status will say will change from sealed to open, and then the rest of the page is essentially what's set up to be kind of like a 411 page about the selection. There's everything about that barrel. Information about David's operation, link to buy Corbin Cash expressions on our website, and then everything else that we might have in stock. But if you go up, David, again, like scroll up to the very top, like the number one question that we get as whiskey nerds, especially when we share bottles with friends, oh, this is good, what's in it, right? And normally you go into this soliloquy, even if you can remember what's in it, you might have a couple of drams deep already at that point. This is meant to kind of solve this, where everything about the barrel is going to be here. If you scroll down just a little bit, it'll have all the information about the bottle. Yield, proof, char level, like everything you could possibly need, including the mash bill, including the tasting notes, and including that video that I also posted a link in the chat about how this selection came to be. So we're embracing this tech. We're not doing it just to be cool. I think it actually serves a very good purpose for everybody. And as I said, every single barrel select that we're going to have moving forward will have something like this. Have you guys tried to experiment with this?
We actually have this on we've been using this tech now. Well, we've been using it for over a year.
I know you have. Yeah, yep.
So we're actually putting on all our bottles, even our vodka and everything, because what it allows us to do is have a direct conversation with our customer. And so there's say me and Michael decide, oh, you know what, we want to do a little giveaway or something. We can say, hey, go back and scan your bottle and see if you've won a free hat or a t-shirt or whatever. But the cool thing is that even if you lose and toss your bottle, your information, once you claim a bottle, you have an account, and your account is stored, and then you can all of the bottles that you claim will be in there. So you will even have access, even if you don't have your bottle, you'll have access to that account, and then you can go back and look at tasting notes, look at anything, but also be still. We're going to use it as a communication tool as suppliers and as retailers to draw back in and have conversations with you about future stuff. So there's a lot of great stuff around this technology that's great for retailers. It's great for suppliers. It's just more cutting edge tech that's going to give us a better conversation piece outside of social media.
Yeah, I mean, this tech has benefits to both producers and whiskey enthusiasts. For whiskey enthusiasts, you alluded to it, it allows you to essentially build your collection in one place. I know there are apps that do the same thing, but lots of those apps are either paid apps or you have to pay them to get access to some premium features. This is just a start for these guys. I fully believe in what they're trying to do. And like I said, you can build your collections. You can put in your own notes. Our webpage has our tasting notes, but there is an option for you to put in your own and have it there in perpetuity. Martin is asking, how does it know that the bottle was opened? Well, there is a perforation tier right next to the cork. When you break that tier, it triggers the sensor in this thing, and that's how it knows that the bottle was opened. Yeah, right there. That's it.
See this line? So once you break that line, it lets everybody know that bottle's been opened.
And you don't need to scan it again to register as open. It'll just know automatically.
Yeah, and the other great thing is you don't have to download an app on your phone. You don't have to do anything. You just have to. Any phone works. If you have a Google phone, I think so. Like any Apple or I think Samsung's on the side, but Apple's on the top. So you kind of have to. Where you pick it up is different for each phone, but but there's no app to download. It just instantly works with your phone. So
it's not an RFD scanner, Scott. It's an NFC technology. So like if you're using Apple Pay, it's exact same tech. right? When you tap your phone next to some sort of a reader, credit card reader, most of the time. So this is very similar, but it obviously doesn't charge you, although that might be another functionality too to suggest to them. But no, you just hold your phone, whatever that NFC reader is in your particular phone model. To David's point, in iPhones, it's top of the phone. Some other phones might have it in different place, but like try it out. All right, it's getting quite late. Let's go to the next sample, which is curveball, if I might say so. It's a sweet potato liqueur. Dave, you want to talk through this?
Yeah. So basically, our sweet potato liqueur. So initially, as I told you in the beginning, I wanted to make the world's first sweet potato whiskey, and then the government said you can't call it whiskey. So I had a couple hundred barrels of sweet potato alcohol. I'm like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? So my mom makes these dessert bars growing up, and I basically said, well, man, what if we just made something and infused all these great spices into it? And so what this is it's 7-year-old sweet potato, 7-year-old barrel-aged sweet potato alcohol. It's infused with cinnamon, vanilla, and nutmeg, a little bit of allspice, and then 2% brown sugar. So most liqueurs are going to be 20 to 30% sugar. I didn't want to put any. I just wanted to put a splash in there, and the government said no. The minimum allowed by law is 2%, because I didn't like super sweet, so that's what we went with. So 2% brown sugar, kind of like drinks like a spiced old fashioned. But yeah, so ultimately, sweet potato whiskey infused with all of those cinnamon, vanilla, nutmeg, and then a little bit of brown sugar, almost like a sweet potato pie.
Almost like
you need to rename this to dessert pork.
Yeah, definitely. So things that we have these drink recipe books that we give out when people order bottles online. We have a full drink recipe book for this particular product itself too. But most of our, I'd say 80% of our drink menus we get on in restaurants in the OND, October, November, December, is you get an ounce of sweet potato liqueur in your ounce with your favorite rye or bourbon in your old fashioned or your Manhattan. But it goes great with eggnog. It makes a bomb ass hot toddy in the winter if you love hot toddies. But we cook a lot with it, so because the sugar's so low, it makes it very diversified. Like you can use it in a lot of different cocktails. We have gin cocktails with it, vodka cocktails, whiskey cocktails, rum. One of my favorites is a mezcal. We use a mezcal, sweet potato liqueur, lemon bitters, and then some apple cider, and it tastes like a smoked Dutch apple pie. So there's a lot of cool things. It's very versatile because of not having so much sugar. So any cocktail that may have some simple sugar added to it, it was you can kind of minus that out. I built it to drink on the rocks as an after dinner drink. So you can do that, but again, it's a very great mixer as well.
Yeah, and I agree with Matt. Matt says this has been a hell of a great tasting. Some weird stuff, but weird in a very good way. Thank you, David.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Chris said he gave old pours a 10, and he doesn't do it often. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, when I set out to get into this, it was really just all about making everything from our farm, and then of course we don't grow malt and all of that, but we get all of our malt is grown here in California, typically relatively close, and malted up in Alameda at Admiral Maltings. But I realized, it's just like I want to make things that are different because there's a lot of. It's funny, when I first got into this business, I didn't realize how many people source from MGP. I just thought everybody had a distillery, and it wasn't until even with vodkas and stuff. I remember when I was trying to learn how to distill, I'm like, well, Sky Vodka is made in San Francisco. I literally drove around San Francisco trying to find Sky Vodka Distillery. And I finally was like, dude, where is this place located? It says it's made in San Francisco. And they're like, dude, it's not made here. And so I called around to different places, and they're like, you need to go talk to those guys over at St. George Spirits at Hangar 1. And he goes, they do more like what you're trying to do. And that's when like kind of Lance and those guys opened my eyes to like, oh yeah, there's not really a lot of brands on the market at the time that actually make their own stuff. And so it was interesting to see, like, have my eyes open in that realm when it's like, I thought every brand I picked up off the shelf at the time was, everybody had a distillery. And then I realized after I got my license, I'm like, oh, there's tons of brands and only 200 distilleries in the whole U.S. at the time. So,
All right. So the first question I asked was whether or not people have actually tried anything from you, David, before. And I can't say it's 50-50 split, but it's 60-40, let's just say. So a good mix of people. We had a lot of new people today on the call, which is good. And then we went into the actual scoring. So we started with American blended whiskey. Chris did say that he mentioned that he scored 10 on all of them. So I'm assuming one of them is him. There was another person who really, really liked it. Everything else is sort of like a bill curve, but the average score is above 5, right? So 5 is your typical shelfer. This is 6, essentially. So this is better, agrees with people more than a typical bottle would. The rye was a standout, 7.5. This would be a selection if we were doing a single barrel pick. Typical bell curve, but yeah, very solid, but the lower end starts at 5. And then it progresses from there. So it's very, very respectable score. Even more so for single barrel pick. Well, thank you guys. But people seem to definitely enjoy that one. Bourbons, again, 6.4 for your standard bourbon. Good score. Some people didn't care for it, but most people kind of fell in the middle. A few people, 3 people actually gave it a perfect 10. So you have everyone on the spectrum. And then the Hazmat Bourbon was 7.9. Somebody didn't like it, which is totally fine. Most people did, which is great. And then the potato liqueur, I kind of, was curious to see the score for that one. And again, bell curve of sorts, but on a good end of that bell curve. So that 7.5 again is a very, very respectable score. I didn't really think it'll get there, but it did. So safe to say this was a successful tasting. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time. Any questions for David before we let him go?
Thanks very much. It was awesome.
thank you guys. I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody coming on, especially first timers.
Hey, David, I'm going to let you go back to your wife.
All right, guys.
Thank you for
you,
joining
sir.
us. Have a good
Everybody.
night.
Nice
All
meeting
right.
you.
Thank you.